Welcome to Recruiter Fuel, a community of recruiters supporting other recruiters. The whole idea is to elevate our industry in the first place. So I want to have a conversation with you today about this concept of recruiting sucks. Now, I know that's not the case. In 2019, though, I wrote a book called Recruiting Sucks, but It Doesn't Have to, breaking through the myths that got us here in the first place. And what prompted me to write a book with that title in the first place? I was flying down to Florida, not California. I speak a lot at various conferences, HR conferences and recruiting conferences. And I was flying down to Florida to speak at such a conference. And being the inquisitive recruiter that I am, I struck up a conversation with the guy that was sitting next to me. Big guy, 10-gallon cowboy hat, from here in Detroit as we were flying down together. And he happened to be, at the time, he's now retired, he was the CEO of one of our tier 1, tier 2 automotive suppliers, a pretty big one. And he had been going back and forth down to Florida in order to set up his vacation home. It was actually a condo, like a 20,000 square foot condo for his retirement. And he was telling me about all the things that he was doing to the house and his entire career. And I asked him just a boatload of questions, as we would do as recruiters. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, he does the polite thing and says, "Hey, why are you going down to Florida?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to speak at a conference." He says, "Really? Tell me about this conference." And I said, "Well, it's a recruiting conference." And imagine he's sitting next to me right here, and he kind of shifts away from me, and he looks at me kind of crooked-eyed almost, and says, "Oh, you're one of them." And it was at that point that I realized we have a perception problem. I needed to write this book, Recruiting Sucks, but It Doesn't Have to address some of these perception issues and these myths that are out there in the first place. So here's the problem I want to address today that I cover in the book, but I want to cover with you as we continue this conversation under Recruiter Fuel. Why do so many outside of the industry think our hiring managers, our clients, and others that don't even come in contact with us, why do they often think that recruiting sucks? Well, there's a number of different perceptions that come out, right? The perception that we don't understand their business. The perception that we don't actually understand the position that they need, maybe because we don't understand their business. And then the perception that, we only have one objective as recruiters, and that's just to put a butt in the seat regardless of the quality of that candidate. I'm not saying these are accurate. What I'm saying is these are the perceptions that we're getting from some of these individuals that we support and others that we don't even come in contact with, that create this idea that recruiting and recruiters and everybody sucks. Now, there's a lot of different reasons that these individuals have these perceptions, right? Maybe the recruiter does suck. I don't think that's usually the case, but there's probably a bad recruiter out there that, a bad apple spoils the bunch. Maybe the hiring leader themselves suck and they're blaming it on the recruiter, right? The recruiter could just be completely overwhelmed with the amount of work they have, not having the right amount of resources. There's all kinds of reasons. Even the hiring manager could be frustrated with the turnover in their own department, so who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the recruiter, and the list goes on and on and on. But we can't control a lot of that stuff. What we need to do as recruiters is focus on what we can control. How do we begin to elevate how we're viewed by those people that we serve? How do we begin to show real value in what we provide? And the last one is, how do we gain the credibility? And if we have credibility, how do we increase the credibility that we actually have? Now, those are all important things that every one of us as recruiters need to know and understand. Whether you're a corporate recruiter or agency recruiter, doesn't really matter. Here's the simple answer, though, to solving some of these problems, to focusing on what we can control versus focusing on what we can't control. What we really need to increase is the level of influence that we have with our hiring leaders. And when we increase our influence, it increases our credibility. It increases the way in which we can persuade a hiring leader to change the recruiting process because we know it's the right thing to do. We've had situations where you've gone to the hiring leader and said, "Let's do this," and they say no, and it seems like we have very little influence with them. So here's the question. How do we actually increase our influence in order to increase that credibility? There's a number of different things. I'm going to give you 2 practical ideas, but here's what I want you to consider. If you want to sign up for our new influencer program that the Recruitment Education Institute is just about wrapping up, send me a message. You can just send it to my email address, slowisz, SLOWISZ, at therecruitmentedu.com or recruitmentedu.com. Or even better yet, go to the website, recruitmentedu.com, sign up for a free account, not one of the paid courses at this particular point. And when the influencer program, which is going to be a 4-week-long program, actually launches, you'll be notified right away. But here I want to give you, in the meantime, 2 basic things that you can do as a recruiting professional to actually increase your influence. We hear the term, number 1, all the time about becoming a subject matter expert. I'm not an advocate of that, and let me explain what I mean. You can't be an expert if you're not actually doing the work. What I suggest is to focus on becoming subject matter savvy. I'm not a developer. I can't understand and be an expert on everything development, but I can become savvy enough about the industry and about the function. But just becoming savvy enough isn't enough. We've got to make sure that the people that we're supporting realize that we're actually trying to learn more about what they do, the industry, the function, and so on. So for example, do you have Google alerts set up about your competitors, about who's hiring, who's not, about new technologies if we're doing technology? And are you sending those alerts to your hiring leader? Now, this is not a situation where your hiring leader is going to be oblivious. They probably see the same things you see, but what's it showing? It's showing that you care enough that you're doing the due diligence to figure out what's going on in those functions, to figure out what's going on in that industry. And you're showing them by positively sharing it with them. That creates this opportunity to have greater influence, greater credibility, because they'll have more trust in you in the first place. Number 2, and I've used this term so many times over the years, it's the first time I'm kind of delivering it this way, but we've got to learn to be the navigator for our hiring leaders. Think about what a navigator does, right? A navigator shows the way. As a navigator, recruiter navigator, whatever you want to call it, we need to plot the course. We need to be the ones saying, Mr. or Mrs. hiring leader, here's the direction we're going to take for this particular search. Now, many of you might already be doing that. Number 2, as navigators, we got to think ahead of everybody else. Here's the reality of recruiting. You know this, and I know this. Problems happen, situations arise, candidates flake out, the strategy we use doesn't work. Make sure that we're setting that tone with the hiring leader in our first conversation. We will have problems because if we don't think ahead, if we don't point out as the navigator the potential roadblocks we're going to hit, when they do come up, it kills our credibility because we didn't draw their attention to it in the first place. And guess what? If nothing wrong happens, we've set the expectation that it could, they're blown away. But when we don't set the expectation, when we don't navigate and think ahead, that's when it comes to killer credibility and it ruins our influence. And number 3, navigators know when to course correct and share that course correction. Mr. or Mrs. Manager, this path did not work. This is the path we're going to take now. And it's before they come to you to say, hey, where's my candidates? We are proactively, as navigators, going to the hiring leader and saying, this is what we're going to do. This didn't work, so we're going to do this. Now, this seems very elementary, but usually we wait till they chase us in order to provide them with that information. We're no longer navigating. We're reacting to the situation. Becoming a navigator helps us increase our influence. And it's amazing how quickly we can change the perception of the value and the influence we bring. Now, one of the pieces of feedback I get from recruiters all the time is, look, I create influence solely by the results. I fill the role, I've got influence. Okay, let's take a look at this here for a second. If all of our influence is only on the end result, does that potentially create some challenges? And I'm going to have you think about this. I believe that it does. When issues arise, if we're only focused on results, when issues arise delaying those results with that candidate, what happens to your influence? It starts to kill it. When markets change, the financial markets, COVID, and it changes the entire recruiting process, it changes the candidates you have, it changes everything. It's now out of your control. Those market changes the results, and you're not building influence. And the third one, what happens when the hiring manager picks the wrong candidate, maybe even somebody that you recommended against, but they blame us for the results? If all of our influence is only tied to the results and we can't control all the results, that makes no sense. What we need to be doing as recruiters is creating influence well in advance of the results. The results just help the story, but we've got to be focused on creating our influence all throughout the process, before the process, and not just hang our hat on results when sometimes we don't control the results. So keep those two things in mind: subject matter savvy, become a navigator, and really the third thing, don't hang your hat just on results. You've got to build influence before that. I hope this was helpful for you as part of the Recruiter Fuel series. Make sure you click on the notification button wherever it is on your screen so you're notified of every single new episode. And as I've said before, if you have a thought, if you have an idea, some practical advice for the recruiting community, make sure to reach out to me directly. And if it makes sense, we'll have you on one of our Recruiter Fuel episodes so you can share the wisdom with the broader group. Again, thank you for watching Recruiter Fuel, and welcome to the community.